Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today's topic is mechanics of respiration, and as you know that we are currently studying the topic or the unit of respiration. So mechanics are very much important, and there are certain aspects when we see the mechanics of respiration. One is that the physical aspect. It has to describe certain aspects like pressure differences. There are certain types of pressures within the lungs, and how the lungs keep themselves open. How does this pressure difference help in breathing in and breathing out? So all these things we will see in this module, that is the physical aspects of respiration. Then we will see the mechanical aspects of respiration. So what would be the mechanical aspects? How the muscles help in respiration. When we say respiration, that means that that doesn't mean the cellular respiration. It means that breathing in and breathing out. So there usually comes a question in your final exams of Punjab University or your prof exam for 10 marks. For this, write down a note on mechanics of respiration as such. So the first thing is the physical aspects of respiration, and the first thing we are going to study is the effect of pressure difference. So it is obvious that movement of air from higher to lower pressure between the conducting zone and terminal bronchioles occur as a result of the pressure difference between two ends of airway. So if airway so the conducting zone is that zone which we described in our previous lecture, which actually conducts the air through the respiratory system, starting from the nostrils. And once the air pressure is lesser at the other end of the conducting zone, obviously, for example, if this is A and this is B, this is the last end, this is the first end, this is the nostril. If the air pressure is lesser here and greater here, and we know that diffusion, it will move from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. That is obvious. So this is the basic principle, and this is the effect of pressure difference. So how much air would flow through the bronchioles? That is directly proportional to the pressure difference, while it's inversely proportional to the frictional resistance to flow. It is quite obvious. So pressure lower than the atmospheric pressure or atmosphere is called subatmospheric pressure or negative pressure. Just remember that this is important, because this is going to be bridged in our next discussion or a subsequent discussion which we are going to undertake today. So the negative pressure means the pressure of air is lower than the atmospheric pressure, and the atmospheric pressure is around 760 millimeter of mercury, and in certain books it is written as 769 millimeter of mercury, but the most accepted one is 760 millimeter of mercury. So there are two types of pressures within the lungs. The first is intrapleural pressure. So intrapleural pressure, or as you know that what is pleura, that is the outer covering of the lungs. There is when we discuss the anatomy of the lungs, in that we discuss that there are visceral pleura and the outer surface pleura. So in between both of these, the in between gap between these two pleural membrane is called pleural cavity, and there is a pressure. That pressure is called intrapleural pressure, and that pressure is due to fluid, because to minimize the friction, there is a fluid inside the pleural cavity. So pleural pressure is the pressure of the fluid in the thin space between the lung pleura and the chest wall pleura. It is slightly a negative pressure. Just remember that. And what is negative pressure? It is atmospheric pressure. And how much it is negative? It is minus 5 centimeters of water. So what is its function? Why it is negative? So during normal inspiration, if you just inhale, that is called normal inspiration, like without any force, the expansion of the chest cage pulls outward. So simply your chest comes out. You can breathe in now and see that your chest cavity or your chest cage is coming out on the lungs with greater force and creates more negative pressure to an average of about minus 7.5 centimeters. So just remember that it is already negative, and it becomes more negative when you inhale, and when you exhale, it becomes lesser negative, but still it is negative. When you exhale, it becomes minus 5 centimeters, but when you inhale, when you take in the air, that would become minus 7.5 centimeters. So lungs have elastic tension of the lungs and of thoracic wall on each other. So just remember that. So due to this, lungs pull inward and try to collapse, while thoracic wall try to expand. So the subatmospheric intrapleural pressure is due to this elastic opposing recoil of the lungs and the chest wall. Then there is second pressure that is present within the lungs, that is called alveolar pressure, and as the name implies, this is the pressure of the air inside the lungs alveoli. So when the glottis is open and no air is flowing into or out of the lungs, the pressures in all parts of the respiratory tree all the way to the alveoli are equal to atmospheric pressure. Just remember, 760 millimeter of mercury. When glottis is open and no air is flowing into or out of the lungs, when there is no transport of air either inside of the lungs or outside of the lung, then at this pressure, or the amount of air that is present, it exerts a pressure which is equal to atmospheric pressure, and that is considered to be zero in the airways, because that is not negative, neither negative nor positive. If it would have been negative, it means air is less than the atmospheric pressure. If it would have been positive, then it means that it is greater than atmospheric pressure. So now it is equal to atmospheric pressure, so it is equal to zero. To cause inward flow of the air into the alveoli during inspiration, the pressure in the alveoli must fall to a value slightly below atmospheric pressure or below zero. It should be negative. Just it is very obvious that if again you will take that example, this is outside of the lung and this is, for example, alveoli. If this is 760 millimeter of mercury and this is 760 millimeter of mercury, no air will move from here to here, from point A to point B. But inside the alveoli, if pressure falls from this, obviously that will the air will gush in, or the air will move in. There is a room, because there is lesser air now, so more air can move inside this the alveoli. So during normal inspiration, which you are doing right now, alveolar pressure decreases to about -1 centimeter of water. This slight negative pressure is enough to pull 0.5 liter of air into the lungs and 2 seconds required for normal quiet breathing. And during expiration, opposite pressure occur, like for expiration it should go up. The alveolar pressure rises to about +1. So what actually happens, there is an equal amount of, this is segment A, that is outside of the lung, and this is segment B, and this is inside the lung. So if from this point to this point, the air pressure is greater as seen from this diameter. Okay. So air pressure, if equal in both the regions, simply what will happen? No air will move. But once this pressure or the air or the oxygen is transported inside, this pressure will fall. This pressure will fall. So simply, there is a room for more air that will enter from here, that becomes -, and this allows room for more air to enter from this segment to this segment, right? Now this has certain amount of air. Once the air will move from here to here, simply this will fill in and there will be lesser air. Now this will become +1 and this will become negative. So now the expiration will occur, and again some CO2 is also being excreted out. So this will add up the partial pressure to this expired air as well. So this air will now be moving out. So alveolar pressure rises to about +1 centimeter of air during expiration, and this forces the 0.5 liter of inspired air out of the lung during the 2 to 3 seconds of expiration. So the difference between the alveolar pressure, the next one is the transpulmonary pressure. What is transpulmonary pressure? Just remember these two pressures, intrapleural and alveolar pressure. So the difference between these two pressure is called transpulmonary pressure, and that ultimately decides whether the lungs will collapse or whether the lungs will be open. So how would we define it? It is the pressure difference between that in the alveoli and that on the outer surface of the lungs, like intrapleural, and it is a measure of the elastic forces in the lungs that tend to collapse the lungs at each instant of at each instance of respiration, called the recoil pressure. So simply, one pressure tries to collapse the lungs and other pressure tries to open the lungs. Whichever okay, since the alveolar pressure is greater than that of the intrapleural pressure, that is outside of the lungs, the difference in pressure, which is transpulmonary pressure here, keeps the lungs against the chest wall. Thus, the changes in the lung volume parallel changes in thoracic volume during inspiration and expiration. So what is that? Simple. Here, the values are from Fox. So, but the Guyton actually says 760 millimeter of mercury. So we will take up to that. So, this is intrapulmonary pressure. This is intrapleural pressure. Intrapleural pressure tries to collapse the lungs, while this is diaphragm. This is at rest. So atmospheric pressure, when there is negative pressure and this becomes more negative, the air will gush in the lungs into the alveoli, and this will cause expansion. This will cause expansion. Simple. Why both of these became negative? Simply because the air moved, the oxygen or the air moved from the lungs into the blood. Then once during expiration, simply this pressure becomes greater. This becomes 760, this becomes 757, again minus 5 or simply minus 3 millimeter of mercury. So this actually causes the lungs to collapse, try to collapse. It doesn't actually collapse, but it actually squeezes the air out. And then the second property of the lung is the physical aspect or the physical properties of the lungs. It has certain physical principles like compliance. The lungs are almost 100 times more distensible, which is meant that they are stretchable than a toy balloon. So another term for distensibility is compliance. So compliance means the ability of the lungs to expand, to stretch, which refers to the ease with which lungs can expand under pressure. When when you inflate a balloon, when you blow air inside a balloon, you are actually causing a pressure to cause distension of the balloon, so it actually gets inflated. Similar goes with the lungs, and the ability of the lungs is far more greater than the balloon to get distended or to get stretched. So lungs have greater compliance. The second physical aspect of the lung is elasticity. And what is elasticity? It refers to the tendency of a structure to return to its initial size after being distended. So in the first place, it has a compliance, which is the ability to distend once it has been distended under pressure, under the pressure of air. Once the air will leave the lungs will come back to their original size, initial size. That ability or that phenomenon is called elasticity. And because of their high elastic content, lungs are very elastic and resist distension. So elastic tension of lungs increases during inspiration when they are stretched, while is reduced by elastic recoil during expiration. Third very important physical aspect of the lung is surface tension. As you know that the air has moisture, and the first step whenever you have studied this respiration, you have been told, you have been taught that whenever the air is taken in or breathing in of the air is taken place, air is moistened by the respiratory system or the lining of the respiratory system. So it means that the the air which is taken in is moistened and has got moisture. So moisture actually compiles inside the alveoli. So alveoli become, with each breath, alveoli has certain amount of water, certain amount of moisture inside them. So what if you don't remove that water? For example, this is an alveoli. Consider that it's an alveoli. Here is the air that is coming inside the alveoli. This is dry air. Consider that it is dry. But once inside the respiratory system, your respiratory system add moisture to it. This is being moistened. Now this moisture is going inside this alveoli. Now if there is no mechanism to remove this, simply this moisture will keep on piling up inside the alveoli, and this will make a lot of hurdle because we don't want this moisture. So what is actually surface tension? This moisture, this water will form a tense layer. So when water forms a surface with air, the water molecules on the surface of the water have an especially strong attraction for one another. So as a result, the water surface is always attempting to contract as it becomes with your tea, the upper layer of the tea, the hot tea. So in the inner surface of the alveoli lined by the fluid, here, this, the inner one, the water surface is also attempting to contract. So this results in an attempt to force the air out of the alveoli through the bronchi, and in doing so causes the alveoli to try to collapse. So simply, what is that? This is alveoli. The moisture which has accompanied this air, or simply there is also extracellular fluid, it tries to collapse the lung because it tries to contract inside. So it tries to contract the alveoli. Once the alveoli will contract here, the air will go out. But we don't want it. We want this way route, only this way, right? So this results in an attempt to force the air out of the alveoli through the bronchi. We don't want this. So what is actually the actual solution to that, and what is the net effect of this? The net effect is to cause an elastic contractile force of the entire lung, which is called surface tension, elastic force, and this is actually the normal physiology. Then there is surfactant. Surfactant is a surface active agent in water, which means that it greatly reduces the surface tension of water. So it will actually, the presence of surfactant here will actually reduce the surface tension, which is actually trying to contract the lung or alveoli. It is secreted by special surfactant secreting epithelial cells called type 2 alveolar epithelial cells. The fluid lines the alveoli and airway passages, resembles a minute communicating bubbles and have a high tendency to collapse, hence the alveolar collapse. Surfactants or the surface active agents produced by type 2 alveolar epithelial cell or type 2 alveoli reduce the surface tension of this and prevent the alveolar collapse, and these contribute to the stability of the lungs, and obviously that will ease the breathing, and the surfactant will reduce the work of breathing. Here you can see the surfactant is lining the alveoli. This is alveolus and this is type 2 alveolar cell, which actually produces surfactant, and it actually reduces, here you can see, reduces the surface tension. Here is capillary endothelium. This is type 1 alveoli and this is type 2 alveolar cell. Type 2 alveolar cell is a specialized cell which can produce surfactant and can line the other alveoli. The rest of 90 or almost 10 to 5% alveoli are type 2, while 95 or 90% are type 1. Just remember that. So the second aspect is mechanical aspect of respiration. It involves the muscles, how the mechanics, the movement of muscles will actually affect. So muscles involved in the respiration are internal intercostal and external intercostal muscles, and these are between the bony portion of the rib cage, the bones. And before proceeding, just remember that these are skeletal muscles because these are attached to the bones. And skeletal muscle, the working of skeletal muscle is when it is contracted. So when the skeletal muscle is contracted, we say that muscles are working. Just remember that. Internal intercostal and external intercostal muscles. And muscles involved in expiration are called rectus abdominis. So the lungs can be expanded and contracted in two ways. Number one, by downward and upward movement of diaphragm to lengthen or shorten the chest cavity. Simply diaphragm will move downward or upward. Once it will downward, it will lengthen the chest cavity. When it will move upward, it will shorten the chest cavity. Number two, by elevation and depression of ribs to increase and decrease the anterior-posterior diameter of the chest cavity. If we would have it in a class, I would practically demonstrate this position to you, but still you can do that. You can stand in front of your mirror sideways, and you can breathe in and you can breathe out. Anterior-posterior, like backside and sidewise, there will be increased diameter. So there are two types of breathing. One is a normal quiet breathing. You are very quiet, you don't know about the breathing is happening as we are breathing right now. And second is heavy breathing, labored breathing, when you have to put in extra force, when you start running, when you jog, when you start swimming, when you start exercising, then you have to breathe heavily. That is called heavy breathing. So what happens during normal quiet breathing? It is accomplished almost entirely by first method, that is by movement of diaphragm. And during inspiration, contraction of the diaphragm pulls the lower surfaces of the lungs downward, while during expiration the diaphragm simply relaxes and the elastic recoil of the lung, chest wall and abdominal structure compresses the lungs and expels air. Simply, if you have to inflate a balloon, you have to blow air with force. You need force. But if you have to take out that air outside of the balloon, you simply untie its mouth and air will move out. So this happens with the lungs. So heavy breathing or during heavy breathing, you need a rapid expiration of the air, while extra force is achieved mainly by contraction of Abdominal muscles, which pushes the abdominal contents upward against the bottom of the diaphragm, thereby compressing the lungs. So muscles for inspiration are external intercostal. The muscles elevate the chest cavity. Simple. Just close your eyes, put a hand, your right or left hand on your chest, and take a deep breath. Very quiet deep breath. You will see that your chest cavity will come up. So the most important muscles that raise the rib cage are the external intercostals, but others that help are sternocleidomastoid muscles, which lift upward on the sternum. Then interior serratii muscles, which lift many of the ribs. Then scaleni are there, which lift the first two ribs. So but the main muscles, skeletal muscles that are involved are external intercostals, while muscles of expiration are abdominis rectus or abdominal recti. These actually pull the rib cage downwards during expiration, which have the powerful effect of pulling downward on the lower ribs at the same time that they and other abdominal muscles also compress the abdominal contents upward against the diaphragm. And then the second are internal intercostal. Just remember that what I told you before, the muscles when are contracted, they are performing their function. So for example, this is the rib cage, these are the ribs, this is inner side, these are internal intercostals, while this side is outer side. So these are external intercostals, these are internal intercostals. The muscles attached to this side are internal intercostals, the muscle attached to this side are external intercostal. So when this is the lung cavity, the air has to come this side. So when the air is coming inside, it needs more space. So external intercostal will contract. Contract means they will pull the rib cage, because in the external intercostals are attached to the rib cage, they will pull the rib cage outward. So this diameter will increase. The difference between these 2 points will obviously increase, and the chest cavity will be raised. So external intercostal muscles are for inspiration. Now air has to be taken out of the lungs, from the alveoli to the bronchi to the windpipe and out from the nose or the throat. Simple. These muscles, internal intercostals, abdominis rectus, these are present near the diaphragm. They will contract and simply pull the diaphragm down, and abdominal cavity will come underneath. So internal and external intercostal act to cause inspiration and expiration. That is how they do. This is how they do. To the left, the ribs during expiration are angled downward, and the external intercostals are elongated forward, and the internal intercostals function exactly in the opposite manner, functioning as expiratory muscles. As I told you this, as they contract, they pull the upper ribs forward in relation to the lower ribs, and this causes leverage on the ribs to raise them upward, thereby causing inspiration. Here you can see scaleni muscles. These are attached to the first 2 ribs, while here the sternum and mediastinum is attached to these muscles, and this is diaphragm. You can see these are internal intercostals, and here you can see external intercostals. So these are the muscles of inspiration and these are the muscles of expiration. Here elevated rib cage, here you can see expiration and inspiration. You can see the diameter from here to here. This is increased because the rib cage has been raised up. Diaphragmatic contraction, increased vertical diameter as well, with increased anterior posterior diameter, the sidewise, and you can see the external intercostals. So sequences of quiet, the sequences of quiet inspiration, when there is a very slight inspiration, you even don't know, you don't even notice that. So the first step, these two steps, this is separate, this is separate, these are occurring sidewise. Contraction of the diaphragm, contraction of the intercostal muscles, this occurs first, then this occurs. Increased vertical dimension of the thorax, here you can see increased vertical dimension or diameter of the thorax region, while the contraction of intercostals, here external intercostal contraction, this actually causes increased anterior posterior dimension of the thorax. Both of these cause increase in lung volume. The lungs will expand, lungs will try to breathe. Once the lungs are expanded, here increase in lung volume, decrease in intrapulmonary pressure. Now the space is greater than the air, that is -3 mm of mercury. Then the pressure gradient establishment from atmosphere, because atmosphere has 760 mm of mercury, while this becomes 757 millimeter of mercury. Oh, pardon me. While this becomes 760 millimeter of mercury. That here. Then there is a difference of -3 millimeter of mercury. So this actually creates a pressure gradient from atmosphere, which is 760 millimeter of mercury, to the alveoli, which is 757. So start of inspiration. Now the air will move from outside into the alveoli. This is outside atmosphere, this is inside, that is lung, alveoli. Inspiration will start. Intrapulmonary pressure becomes equal to atmosphere. Simply, once the air is moving until this pressure becomes 760 millimeter of mercury, then this causes the end of inspiration. Simple. Then sequences of quiet expiration. Simple. The first step is relaxation of external intercostals, which are the here external intercostals, which actually cause increase in lung volume. Decrease, once the external intercostals will relax, they are not contracted, decrease in size of thoracic cavity, which will cause elastic recoils of lung. This will cause decrease in lung volume. Increased intrapulmonary pressure, that will actually cause +3 millimeter of mercury. Like this will become 763 millimeter of mercury. This will cause end of expiration. This is expiration, you can see. This is inspiration, you can see. This is a normal. Here if you draw this is, so forced ventilation, inspiration aided by contraction of accessory muscles, scalenes and sternocleidomastoid, and decreased intrapulmonary pressure to -20 millimeter of mercury. So there would be greater pressure difference, and expiration will be aided by contraction of abdominal muscle and internal intercostals and increase in the intrapulmonary pressure to plus 30 millimeter of mercury. So thank you very much for your time. We will continue this unit